you will exit your business someday.
This is the time where you need that support and you maybe need another eye in the business and you need a fresh perspective or you need a system to help you out. So I think it's the boutique hub that has this great saying, do what you do best and hire out the rest.
Smart inventory management isn't really about buying more or less. It's about buying smarter. Things move quickly and we need to keep up with those.
The best part about being in retail is the door opens again every day and you have a new chance to kind of get better and improve as a business.
Dane, it is a pleasure to have you on the Footwear Retailer podcast here today.
Thanks for having me, Pete.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm going to be seeing you as we're recording this. Both of us are going to be at Crystal Volkaitis' Evolve as well. And I know this episode will probably come out a little bit later than that. Another great retail event that we're both going to. And I think part, Dane, of being a good retailer is going to different events, whether it's Evolve or whether it's your retail association. Like most of us in the retail in footwear belong to the National Shoe Retailers Association or a variety of these different things. And, you know, getting in and talking to different people at these different organizations gets you such great ideas, lets you learn about different things. I mean, whether you're hearing it here on podcasts, whether you're going to these events, but getting together with a group of like-minded people is such an important piece. And you know what? Management One is often at these events, and you're a big piece, not only for the footwear retailers, but for retail in general. Management One has been a partner to so many retailers over the years, because one of the biggest things that we have in our stores, of course, is inventory, and you're involved in inventory mastery, right, Dane?
I like to think. And, you know, first off, Pete, I'm so excited about Evolve. And if this recording comes out after, you know, I am sure it's going to be an incredible event. This is my third year and it's the last Evolve conference. So super excited to see you there. And then I'll be with the NSRA in Atlanta in August. So I'll be there as well, connecting with the footwear community. So definitely.
Yeah, that one's in Glendale.
Oh, it is. Okay. We'll be there. We're there.
Yeah, so we were in Atlanta at the shoe show in February, but we'll be in Glendale, Arizona for the NSRA Leaders Conference. So yeah, I'll be there too, and excited to see you there.
Good thing you told me. I would have booked the wrong flight. So.
That's when we have other people booking that stuff, and you know, traveling around as much as you do, it's always hard to keep everything straight. But it's great that you're going to be there and be a part of that as well.
Good.
I think what we need to ask here to our listeners today is, how confident are you in your inventory decisions? And are they truly driving profits, or are they draining cash flow? And I think those are things that you do particularly well. Why don't you tell, not only give us a little lowdown on you and your 10 or so years with the business now, as well as what Management One does for independent retailers and how you can help them turn around some of the areas of their business to make them into areas of joy instead of pain.
All right. Well, first, Pete, let's set out some ground rules, right? Because I think this is where things get really interesting with inventory, right? First off, number one is every single retailer, inventory is your largest cash expense. Usually it sits around 52% is your cost of purchases, right? So majority of your cash is going back into your inventory. And so there is no more important place, and every retailer out there knows this, but there is no, better place to shore up your bottom line, your profits, your cash flow. It's all sitting in your inventory, right? We know this. We know this.
Sure.
Sometimes we know it intellectually, but we don't really feel that. Right? The one thing that's really bugging me right now, Peter, I want to address, there's two things, and we'll kind of go on how we help people, and we'll get into all that. The one thing that I'm hearing the most right now is, how do we, if there's tough times in the economy, the tariffs ahead, people go right to cutting expenses. That's the solution. I'm going to cut hours. I'm going to cut payroll. I'm going to cut, talk to my landlord. And all that might be important. But then they're sitting on piles and piles of cash, sitting in dead stock and dead inventory in their business. And so I really want to encourage, and I hope that this is the discussion that we can get into today, that the best way to prepare yourself as a retailer for economic booms, economic uncertainty, downturns is to have mastery of your inventory, right? And so, we look at it two ways, right? There's inventory management, which is your POS system. It's how you
Sure.
kind of calculate everything and know what's going on in the business and know what stock you have. And then there's inventory planning and forecasting, right? And really being able to look forward into the business, into the outlook of what you can do and what you can drive, and challenge yourself to really make profitable buying decisions, in that kind of future 12-month outlook. And so that's where really Management One has stepped in with retailers for the past 40 years, guiding them towards better inventory decisions and really demand forecasting of what the future might hold and how to pair that back to profitable buying and inventory management. So that's the nutshell there. I'm sure we have a lot
Yeah.
of topics to dive into from that.
I mean, I'll use our own stores. We have two stores, and it hasn't been the best January and February. It's been dreadful. And I've talked to several different retailers here in the Northeast as well as in Canada. Most of them are experiencing the same sort of thing where, with all the uncertainty going on right now, in Canada and in the US, of a variety of different things. The till hasn't been ringing as much as it has maybe in the last couple of years during those two particular months to kick the year off. And now we start looking ahead at our cash flow plan. And it's like, if we don't have the cash that we had expected in the till over the first couple of months, how does that affect the next couple of months? And when we look at our cash flow analysis and we start digging into that versus our inventory, and we have this steady flow of inventory that we've pre-planned and coming in, how are we going to pay for this? And as most people, of course, you can go to your cash reserves if you have cash reserves or your line of credit, whatever the case is. But, one of the things that you had mentioned there is this idea of if we are planning our inventory and we are looking at our dead stock and we are looking at these sort of things, it's not like I'm going to sell a lot of winter boots now, because even though I was away for a month, came back home and we had give or take 2 feet of snow in the last week. It's all gone away because we had great warm weather, and it's great for spring sales, but the winter sales are done now essentially. And so how do we take that dead stock? How do we plan that? And what can we now look at as far as event promotions and a variety of different things? Because we need to plan this stuff. It's like, I need to have a certain amount of cash in the bank in order to pay the bills of the new stuff coming in. I didn't have that planned right now, but if we're looking at these numbers on a regular basis, we make the change. That's the beauty of being an independent retailer. We can make the changes that we need to make and address the things we need to address along the way if we have the right tools, if we have the right information, if we have the right data. And then we can sit down with our team and say, what are we going to do to add another event, to inject some cash flow, to maybe try and do some things that we haven't done in the past that we'll need to do here in order to bring more dollars in so that we can make this season a successful one. And I think these things all work part and parcel, Dane, with each other. And if all you're doing is looking at your inventory at the end of the year and you're not looking at your cash flow and what you need, then you run into these problems. It's almost like it's too late at that time.
Yeah, and Pete, so I come from a retail family. I'm a third generation retailer. And, Dad and my uncle used to always say when we were in team meetings, or that the best part about being in retail is the door opens again every day and you have a new chance
I love it.
to kind of get better and improve as a business, right? And it's this
Mhm.
very unique opportunity that retailers get. We're in a tough business, but there are those kind of little moments of winning and joy there. And so, listen, you're right. It's spring now. We should be focused on that. And there needs to be a lot of energy around newness, right? The winter sales, the winter clearance, the winter sellouts and promotions, it's kind of done. Now we have to look towards the future. And so we got to be strong with spring right now. We got to be making big statements, but it's the moment to be a tough, critical retailer right now, especially in regards to your inventory. So this is probably, if I had to get one point across right now, and in our discussion, this would be it, right? Most retailers there's kind of two mistakes that they'll play off of right now when the January and February sales are in a little bit of a downturn. The first is what we talked about, slashing expenses and just kind of, especially when it comes to payroll, right? Especially in footwear, where that is your secret weapon against generic websites, the fitting, the customer service. So cutting payroll is like a kiss of death to a footwear retailer, right?
It
Now, I
is.
know that there maybe have to be smart scheduling, but you don't want to just, again, start slashing hours, slashing payroll, not hiring great people that are going to service your customer. So that's number one. Number two is people start pulling back their budgets and severely underbuying. And then you end up in a situation where you're creating, a self-fulfilling prophecy. The surest way to depress your sales is to not buy enough inventory, right? It's pretty simple. So what I would say here is you have to start being laser sharp with how you're reviewing your data and how you're actually looking at your business. So, that means maintenance markdowns, right? Don't let things go too long, into the season before you start looking at a markdown. I know that there's this, tendency we want to hold on to that margin as long as possible. However, we may be in a position where we really need stuff to move and to get some of that cash flow back. Okay. So that's a great first place to start. What promotions can we have coming up? Start doing targeted promotions in the areas and the categories you need to move, whether it be buy one, get one 20% off, promotional sales in a category over a weekend. You got to start being smart and driving those promotions and markdowns where they need to be. And then on the positive side, right? When something's working, you have to catch it and keep reinvesting in it, right? So these are the, areas where if we're sharp, if we're watching our data, if we're responding to the business instead of just reacting at the end of season, right? These are the ways that we are going to be able to keep up with whatever, the economy throws at us, which could be interesting this year.
It could be. I think a couple of the words that I like to use around that is we don't want to be inventory rich and cash poor, right? And it's better to be cash rich and inventory poor in a way, because we want to have our inventory leveled properly. And if all that stuff, like you had mentioned about the dead stock, if we're sitting with so much stuff that's dead stock and continues to be dead stock, there comes a time where it has to leave the building. And how are you going to do that sort of stuff? How are you going to work through those different things? And are you even looking at those things? And I think we need to put a rhythm in place. If we, for you, the listener, if you don't have a rhythm in place already, to be reviewing these things as more often probably than you are. And I think a tool like Management One and sort of those rhythms of whether you're doing it on a weekly basis, a bi-weekly basis. Some people don't even. I've been working with a few retail businesses that aren't literally have just put in point of sale systems in the last couple of years and don't even have, digitized inventory at all. And so how are you doing this and what can you do to improve, I think is an awesome part of this conversation today, because whatever level you're at, whether you're still writing out stuff by hand or whether you're at a level of being able to look at things and print reports, or whether you're at a level of having a system like Management One help you with your planning, what else can you be doing to take it up a notch when inventory, like you mentioned, is the largest item on the balance sheet for every small business owner that's listening here today? And how can we manage that? Because we know what our investment portfolio says. We are looking at that. We know what's in our bank account. We know what our home's worth. Like all of these other big things that belong to you, the business owner, that are in your sort of parameter. Why do we not look at inventory deeper than we do as a general rule, Dane?
You know why? Because it's scary to look under the bed and see the mess there, right? Or take a look under the hood, or whatever phrase you want to use. And really, it is always surprising to me when I get on the phone, and I have the privilege of speaking with hundreds of retailers a month, and probably in the course of a year, we're talking thousands and thousands, right? And the one thing that never ceases to amaze me, and by the way, it happens at a store that's just starting up. It happens at a store that's been in business for 20 years. It happens at a $20 million retailer. It happens at a $500,000 retailer. And I ask, how much inventory do you have on hand on average? How much do you have right now on hand? And it is always shocking to me when I see the response, the look in the eyes, and then just, I haven't looked at that in a while. Right. And so the first part of all of this, like you said, is the power of knowledge, right? The power of data. We are now in a world where you can get numbers in the click of a button. We should be on, these metrics of our business and these KPIs, right? What do we need to know? And that's why I always look at like a Monday morning report. What are the 10 key data points that you need to look at every Monday morning and measure yourself against week after week? Because you'll never know where you need to go if you don't know where you are, right? So that's number one. The second, and I'll give a little bit of a plug here for Management One, right? But more so, the plug that I'm going to give is for open to buy planning, right? And this is one of those, it's a little bit of an old school retail mentality. The term is it even feels a little dated, but I'll tell you why open to buy is sexy, right? Because open to buy, it's what allows you to plan for cash flow in your business. And another thing that really, I try to kind of hammer in with new retailers that we're working with and to get them in kind of a shift of mindset is stop just looking at LY numbers. Okay. LY sales are just telling a tiny, tiny piece of the story. How much did you receive in order to do those sales? What was your turn in that category in the business? What was your average stock to sales ratio? These metrics are just as important, if not more important than sales, right? So when we're thinking about open to buy and we're planning the future, we're taking into account a lot richer data than just, hey, what did we do in women's boots in sales last year? And let's just beat that. We want to put together a comprehensive plan over the next 12 months of what achieving profitability in a class actually looks like. And so the ability to analyze that and then have some place to benchmark against. So the shift here with open to buy is instead of benchmarking against LY, you're benchmarking against your potential opportunity that actually exists in the class. So if you're over inventoried, you know how much, because you're benchmarking it against a forecasted inventory level. If you're behind in sales, you have an idea of how much because you're benchmarked against a forecasted sales number that is going to get you to that cash flow positive state. So it takes just a tremendous amount of guesswork and having that full understanding and your finger on the pulse when it comes to where's my business at? Ergo, where's my cash at?
Without the cash, we don't have a business. And I think that's the thing, in these trying times, when we go into these times, and we've been through them before. Many of us who have been in business for even back to COVID, have been through this sort of thing before where we're seeing troubled times and expect them sort of ahead based on what everybody's saying in the news. But planning for that sort of stuff and understanding what we need to do and the shifts that we need to make and where we need to put our eyes and our focus is such an important piece of running a successful, profitable business.
Yeah. I mean, listen, we all know it all comes down to cash. And for footwear retailers, right, the interesting thing is it's a much more difficult business to plan for because, a women's fashion boutique, you could turn inventory 5-6 times a year. Footwear, you're lucky if you turn it twice. So the planning has to be very future forecasted. We have to really look into those pre-buys, but there is nothing, again, like we said before, that will depress sales, like depressing your inventory in areas that you need it. So what I'm hearing already, right, is, hey, let's talk about, we're looking forward to fall of this year, holiday of this year already, obviously. And retailers say, I don't want to increase my budget anywhere. I'm taking my budgets down when it comes to buying. And there's two things, again, that's going to be really difficult there and going to cause a lot of problems. One, if the financial insecurity or the economy doesn't hit turbulent times, you're a little bit screwed because now you're not going to have the inventory you need. And the second part that is so important is that you're going to kill yourself in the classes that are actually driving the business, right? If you want to take a class that has historically been a little weak, that's where you put less budget into it, right? But if you have a well-performing class, let's go with that women's boots example, if they are on fire and we're buying for the next season out and you don't buy enough there, listen, the vendors are getting tight with their inventory too in these
Darn
cases.
right.
If you don't put in aggressive orders in the places that matter, you're not going to get the inventory.
So true. The other thing that we're dealing with, and we deal with this a little bit more in Canada than in the States because the warehouses don't stock as much here in Canada as they do in the States. So a lot of times you had mentioned future orders. A lot of times our percentage of the buy is much more future oriented than in season. And one of the things I hear a lot from my coaching clients and in the industry is that through COVID, we understood the reasons why they lengthened out the time for futures, whereby even our trade shows now, for example, are back so much further than they were. And I'll use an example. I'm just going to call it out because it's one that I think a lot of us deal with: Birkenstock. And Birkenstock is a great brand that many of us do very, very well with. But one of the things as a frustration is that we're recording this in March and they've said we need our orders by April. Well, if we need our orders for next spring and summer by April, yet their biggest season hasn't even really begun yet, and we have no idea where to plan for that because we don't know how the season is going. Plus, we're dealing with last year's leftovers along with that. We've triple sort of overlaid on top of inventory problems when we can't actually change around any of the orders, or we can't send stuff back from this year, or we can't maneuver things. And I just use that as one example. There's lots of examples out there that I could have used. I'm just picking on Birkenstock for this one because we're dealing with it right now. But many of the brands are like this. Go ahead, Dane. You're going to say something.
Because no one wants to get stuck with inventory, and they're thinking the same thing, right?
I get that.
And listen, of course, the independent retailer always gets the short end of the stick in these situations. And we know that, right? These big brands should be, taking accountability and taking on some of the risk as well, because, family owned businesses, it shouldn't all be on their backs. But those vendors are having the same conversations. They're worried about the future. They're worried about the economy. They're worried about getting stuck with too much inventory. When I was on the wholesale side of the business in the 2010s, right? We used to overcut willy-nilly, right? We'll sell it, we'll offload it, we'll get it to, a off-price store. Mm-hmm. There was no worry about overcutting goods, right? And now that is just simply not the case, right? Vendors are cut to order. They are not, looking to have overstock. They're not looking to have replenishment for you in season. You get your orders in early and you get what you get and you don't get upset. Right? Especially the ones that actually have the muscle in order to say that.
Exactly. From a perspective of looking at what we consider, at least at our stores, as core stock. And being that we're talking Birkenstock, I will just use a Birkenstock Arizona Havana leather, which is a very core piece.
Right.
You would think that from something like that perspective, that the brands would be working to have core in stock at all time, knowing that this is a core piece and has been for decades, that we should be able to fill that kind of thing in along the way, because they'll end up getting more sales too, because we can actually have access and fill in along the way and not be missing sizes and a variety of different things. Why do you think that isn't happening as much as it used to? And again, like, I'm not trying to pick on Birkenstock here, because this is a thing that's with almost every brand out there. And it's just that in that particular instance, a lot of people know that particular sandal.
Yeah,
so,
of course.
Why do you think this is when it comes down to, let's say, the 10 most core pieces at any given brand? Why are they not stocking those and having them available for ready access? Because just as we know, if we can be filling in on stuff and managing our inventory properly, that they'll end up selling more too.
Yeah, I think there's two reasons there, right? The first is, I do think that there are brands that are worried about oversaturation, right? They want it to feel like there's a little bit of still, scarcity out there, right?
Okay.
And there is something to say about that, right? When something becomes too available, I mean, we saw it happen to Converse, right? Yeah. When something just becomes too available and too out there, and it's all over the place, and it's every retailer, every market, every off price, then it starts filtering down. And all of a sudden that, core style that used to be in such high demand kind of starts, waning. So they have to be a little bit, that's where I'll give them a little bit of, leeway. Right? If they're doing it from a brand positioning, scarcity mindset, create a little demand for it, I can run with that, Pete, right?
Okay.
Like I could kind of,
Yeah.
but I think the other side of that comes down to the conversation we were just having, which is they are sitting in a boardroom having the same conversations about getting stuck with inventory and cash flow being a problem and maybe having to make layoffs at a big company like that. And so they're probably cash strapped too in a lot of cases. And
Mhm.
we think about it as they're just these big entities and corporations, but they're having the same conversations. And I will repeat this, right? It is the biggest shame always. And I saw this for years in my business, working alongside my father, who was a shoe dog through and through, right?
Love it.
And we saw what happened with Nike, right? When they
Yeah,
just abandoned the independents, right?
for sure. Now they're coming back after it, right?
Yeah, yeah, because they build their business on the backs of the independent retailer, and then they get too good for us, and then they remember who kind of don't bite the hand that feeds, so to speak. So that it has been a nice little turnaround, but it is unfortunate that oftentimes the burden of business and inventory and excess falls upon the retailer. But that's why those good vendor relationships,
Exactly.
investing in the areas that you need to, it'll make you more important to the vendor as long as you're investing in the right places in your business and not just spending money to spend money.
Getting back to the data side of things, if you have the data to show and share, and I use both of those words, to show and share, because I think there's a lot of independent retailers out there that don't share appropriately with their brands. And how can you expect them to understand your position if you're unprepared to share what you've got? And so I think part of this rhythm that we go through twice a year in our buying cycles, and we should be going through it more often with our reps, independent reps, and stuff like that too, is to make sure that we're sharing the information that they both need and we both need in order for them to help their business, like you said, on their side of things, to make sure that they have the inventory that we need, but also to make sure that they understand where our positions are so that they can help us through, because it really is a partnership, Dane. As much as some people will, I've heard it saying, oh, they're not a partner, but I look at all the brands that I work with as partners, and we're in partnership to promote the brand, and they're in partnership to promote our store. And what do you do with partners? You share stuff, and you work through things, and you work through problems, and you go through the different things to create a strong bond, a strong relationship, so that when you do need your partner to step up, they'll step up and they gladly do it.
Yeah, and listen, it just makes for more productive conversations in market when you know your stuff and you know your facts. And so when the rep tries to push something on you, hey, we didn't sell that well this year. We had a high markdown percentage in this category in your business, and we're going to walk away from that. But where we are doing well, over on this side of the business, let's focus there, let's invest there. So the truth in what you're saying, and I don't think there's a retailer out there that would disagree with me, the more you come to the table knowing your numbers and having
Exactly.
facts to back you up, the more power you have in that vendor retailer dynamic, right? Because you're not going to get pushed around. You're not going to take what you don't need. You're not going to keep merchandise on your floor, and you're going to ask them for, to return to vendor. You're going to ask them for a swap. You're going to ask them to partner with you because you're proactive about the business and not just walking into a showroom appointment and taking whatever they tell you to take, right? So, and also knowing when to walk away from a vendor,
It's
right?
important. Especially, there's so many family heritage businesses here, 3 generations, 4 generations, 5 generations. It's a wonderful thing for our industry to have those heritage family businesses. But when we look at that side of things, it's like these words come up often, but we've always carried
Yeah.
that, but we've always done it that way. But there's one thing that is true, and even more so now than it was, and at a faster rate: change is happening. And we need to be able to adapt to change as independent retailers so that we can continue for the next generation. And just because we've carried an existing brand, just because we've carried an existing department, just because we've never had a point of sale system, or just because we've never used an outsourced supplier to help us with inventory planning or with marketing or with any of the other services that go on, or we've never had a web store, doesn't mean that we need to actually we do need to make the changes. Our customers are expecting it, and we do need to have the stuff that they're coming in looking for, or we will lose to the big box. We will lose to the online people. We will lose to another store down the road. Dane, because you mentioned it, you're talking to literally hundreds of retailers a month and thousands a year. Navigating through retail is not an easy ride.
No,
But
sir.
what are some of the trends that you see that are happening now that people need to maybe be looking at more now than ever, that are going to affect independent footwear retailers for maybe the next year or maybe for the next decade? Like, what are the things now that you're saying this is an obvious shift, and if you're not there yet, you really need to look at it?
So here's what I've been seeing, right? And it's interesting because it's kind of like a light bulb moment for a lot of retailers. And I don't think it's that interesting. I think it's something that's tried and true, but the recognition and remembering that it's your job as a merchant to find new and interesting product, to
Mhm.
try a new brand, to go with a local vendor, to bring new things in, to bring something that is unexpected, or kind of bucks the system of what you've done, like you were saying. And I think that this kind of curiosity around discovery and newness and freshness, the retailer has to stay connected to that, because if you're just doing the same thing, you can expect the same results. And so again, like you said, it's really, especially in footwear, you hold on to these big brands that you've carried for a long time. But we want to know, remember when Hoka was coming up, and there were some retailers that wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole, and on and of new brands sparked a lot of fear. And the great retailers that got in early and said, I'm going to take a chance, I'm going to go for it, look how high they soared on that. And so then what's the next one? You can't ride a wave too long. You have to go find the next product, because eventually they're going to get too big for their bridges. They're going to be on every website. You're just competing with the anonymous internet void out there. And so it is your responsibility, and it should be your creative juices, right, to find what else is the next big thing and what you could bring in that will surprise and delight and intrigue your customer time and time again.
A few years back, and I wrote a little book on it. It's called The Business Owner Breakthrough. But the idea here is that every business should have a promise, and that's what you promise your clients. And then you should align your product, your process, and your people to that promise, promote it properly, and then you get to profit. But when we look at that product piece, sometimes the product doesn't necessarily align with the promise. And I think that's an interesting piece too. And, if we go back to, even because there's, in our industry, there has been a huge shift to athletic over the last several years. And for those that haven't made that shift to athletic over the several years, they're finding it harder and harder to appease some of the customers because they don't have certain product offerings. I'm just using this as an example because it could go the other way too. But if you were always sort of more dress focused and you haven't taken on athletic or athletic inspired, and you're losing that customer to athletic and athletic inspired, maybe it's time that you changed your promise a little bit. Maybe it's time that you looked at, like you said, the newness, what's happening in the industry, all these different things, so that we're tweaking around our promise a little bit to hit the customer in the way that they want to be served and provide them with what they want to be served, not just what we've always served them with.
And you know what the greatest example of this is that we should all learn from is what happened in the menswear industry, just like a decade ago, when all of a sudden you had this huge switch to a more casual look, right?
Exactly.
The suiting industry changed as we knew it, right? Guys weren't wearing suits to interviews anymore, let alone their work. It just became an outdated way of dressing day to day for a large swath of guys. And the menswear stores that adapted, that said, you know what? We're not going to resist this. We're not going to try to pretend it's not happening. And we're going to lean into some new,
Mm.
kind of business casual, or even some casual wear and t-shirts and ready to wear. And those are the men's stores that adapted and survived. And the stores that were refused to walk away from their suiting roots, the stores that refused to kind of change or adapt, a lot of them got left behind. And
Yeah.
so it's a great lesson to be learned about retail. And, it happens in every segment of the business. It just matters. You don't want to be on the wrong side of history, so to speak.
You don't. And when you do see those things starting to tail off a little bit, it's like we need to be getting back to that sort of data side. This is why data is such an important piece of the puzzle in order to help us make these decisions. Because one thing we do as business owners is we make decisions. And in order to make the right decision, for you, your business, and your family, we need to have all of the available information so that we're making the right decision. And Dane, as we sort of wrap up this segment and this show here today, what are sort of three main things that you would like to suggest if they haven't already done it, starting to look at for these changing trends, for the different things that are happening in our industry? What are three things that you're saying you really need to dig down and look at this these days?
Yeah, I'd say the overarching umbrella
Hmm.
is you have to make data-driven decisions right
Yeah.
now. The only insurance that you have against something that is out of your control, like economic factors, is to be making decisions that are based in data. So there's a few things here, right? The first thing is know what your age merchandise is, right? Do not have any, hidden merchandise that you don't know has been sitting there for a year plus. And we all are guilty of it, right?
Yeah, sure.
And what's in the storage room that's been sitting in boxes that you'll say next winter, next winter, next winter, right? Those boots will still serve me, and they're sitting in literal dust and cobwebs on the box. We've all been
Hmm.
guilty of that. Okay,
For
so
sure.
take an aged merchandise report and really know what's dusty in the business. Okay, then look at what is actually growing in the business, right? And so I would take a look at your receiving and your sales last 90 days, year over year, right? What's driving your business and how much are you receiving in order to drive that business, right? Know that stock to sales ratio so that you could be making informed decisions on where to continue to invest and where you need to double down and where you need to be a little more aggressive, where maybe you pull back a little bit and you start being a little more conservative, but you have to know that. And then the third thing is continue to invest in yourself. And whether that be hiring outside experts or help to guide you through this right now, don't stand on ceremony, right? And don't say, this is the time that we need to hunker down and not change anything. And this is the time where you need that support and you maybe need another eye in the business and you need a fresh perspective or you need a system to help you out. So I think it's the Boutique Hub that has this great saying. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, Pete, but
I'm not.
do what you do best and hire out the rest.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And I think that's a great place to cap the show. And I think my main key takeaway with this conversation is really when it comes back to inventory anyway, that smart inventory management isn't really about buying more or less. It's about buying smarter. And we need to be smarter in all of the areas of our business. Things move quickly and we need to keep up with those. And as business owners, as we move from detail to dashboard, where we're not able to be involved in the detail in every little detail of our business, and we're looking at those dashboard metrics, it's like so long as someone's looking at the detail so that they can get the dashboard that you need to make decisions properly in order to run your business and in order to take this business to the next level, potentially pass it on to the next generation or prep it for a successful exit. Because one of the things, you will exit your business someday. And whether that is a planned exit or a forced exit, or whether it's a family transition, whatever the case is, we want to always be working to have the systems in place, have the people in place that are going to carry on with or without us so that this business and this legacy that we've worked so hard to build over the years continues on and serves our clients and serves our families along the way. So thanks so much, Dane, for being a piece of this. And if people want to get in touch with you or want to find out more about Management One and all the great things that you guys do there, how do they do that?
Yeah, well, you could find us, you could visit us on our website at management-one.com. or find us on Instagram, M1 Retail Experts. So that's M1, the number one, Retail Experts. And I'd love to chat with anyone out there. And Pete, I really appreciate you having me today, and looking forward to seeing you at some live events coming up soon.
That sounds so great. Make it a great day, Dane.
Thank you, Pete.